Hey everybody, I'm Zach.
And I'm Jesse.
And you're watching In Depth.
On Now You Know.
So this is the Tesla Q1 deep dive.
So Tesla stock price just hit the lowest point in 2 years.
Yeah, do you want to know where Tesla stands and where it's going?
We're going to deep dive into all the numbers, all the questions, and really get a handle on what's going on next on In Depth.
Sponsored by abetterrouteplanner.com. If you're looking for a way to plan your next trip, especially if you need waypoints and accurate numbers for what's going to be in your battery when you get to the next charging station, I highly recommend abetterrouteplanner.com.
You can even use it in your Tesla.
You can. And thanks to hypercharts.co for this episode, because we have a lot of charts that are from Hypercharts. You should go check them out. All right, so 2019 Q1 earnings call and letter. We had Elon, we had the CFO, Zachary Kirkhorn, on the call, and lots of cool information came out. Let's dive into it. So the first thing that we want to talk about is Q1 Model S and X vehicle deliveries. Now, I think this is an important key to understanding what happened this quarter. If we don't understand this, then I think we just go with what all the big boys talked about, which was that, oh, they're not selling many cars this quarter.
Right.
So what happened this quarter? Model S and X sales went way down. In fact, there was only about 6,000 Model S deliveries in the quarter, and that is the lowest since 2014. And there was only about 6,000 Model X deliveries in the quarter. That was the lowest since Q2 of 2016.
Now, a lot of people are trying to pretend that this is why did this happen?
Right.
There's no reason
People
for this to
don't
have
want
happened.
the cars anymore.
This isn't really the case. First of all, Tesla got rid of their lowest priced Model S and Model X, which they've just brought back.
Right.
But they got rid of their standard range Model S and Model X. So if you wanted to buy a Model S or X, you were going to have to spend a pretty penny.
Yeah, at least like $95,000.
Which is a lot more than, a
$78,000.
Right.
I mean, it's a huge difference. So that was one component. The second component is everyone in that world knows that the refresh was coming.
Right.
So if you were on the fence about like, hey, well, I'm thinking about buying a new Model S,
Right.
you weren't going to do it.
Right, because you knew that at some point, very soon, there was going to be a new Model S and a new Model X. And actually, that just happened. And we talked about it in Tesla Time News yesterday.
Right.
Because there's now a more efficient motors in the Model S and Model X.
Exactly. So now let's look at Q1's Model 3 deliveries. So about 51,000 Model 3s were delivered. So yes, that's the lowest Model 3s delivered in 3 quarters. But not by much. That's about 8,500 cars less than the average of the last 2 quarters. And remember that Tesla switched in this quarter to delivering to European and Chinese Model 3s. So they pretty much stopped their US deliveries and decided that the whole quarter they were going to ship cars to China and Europe.
Right.
And the problem with that is that to get there, you have to put them on ships, and it's not a very seamless transition. Right. So what a lot of analysts thought was, oh, your Q1 numbers for Model 3 went down, means you have no more demand for that car.
Right, and that's not necessarily what happened. It's just that they were still on boats. They had already been produced. They just haven't been delivered yet. Because, first you have to produce the car, then you have to ship it to the boat, then you have to put it on the boat, then you have to sail the boat across the ocean,
right.
And through the Panama Canal, across the ocean, to Europe. Then you have to take the cars off the boat. Then you have to get the cars to distribution centers. Then the distribution centers have to give the cars to people.
And here's the problem. They all come in clumps. So you've got hundreds and thousands of cars you have to deliver in a short period of time, which makes it a huge logistics problem. And in fact, Elon said this was the most difficult logistics problem I have ever seen, and I have seen some tough ones.
Right. So basically, there were a lot of cars that just were not delivered, but were still produced and still are going to be delivered very soon.
Well, in fact, half the deliveries happened in the last 10 days of Q1.
Right.
Half the deliveries in 10 days.
Half of the deliveries, right, because they were all on boats the entire quarter.
So let's look at this chart of small and mid-sized luxury cars. And we can see that this is all cars. This includes Teslas and BMWs and so forth. But look at what I've circled in red. Those are the months of January and February. So in 2017, 18, and 19, those are the lowest sales months by far. People just don't buy cars in January and February as much because it's winter in most places. And I guess that's not a fun time to buy cars.
Right.
December, however, if you look at where I've circled there in blue, those are typically one of the best months to sell cars because it's end of the year. I guess it's, you want to get it in before the end of the tax season, maybe Christmas presents. I don't know. So when you're looking at this quarterly data, you can't look at Q1 compared to Q4 because they're two completely different times of the year. What you should do is look at them based on year over year.
So look at one quarter compared to that quarter last year.
Right. So we'll be doing that instead. So let's take a look at Q1's total deliveries. This is all of the cars that Tesla sold for Q1 of 2019. That's 63,000 cars delivered. Now, keep in mind what we just pointed out. Now, does it look a little bit different without the gloom and doom that many analysts are looking at? We see that there's that drop, but now that we understand that the drop came from S and X being retooled for the new version, and that most of the Model 3s were stuck on ships, we can see that doesn't look so bad anymore.
Right. It's not necessarily a giant drop in demand, basically just that they were on ships. There's still a huge demand for the Model 3.
Right. It could have been really bad news. It could have been that some competitor was coming out with a car that was going to cut into sales of the Model S and the X.
Right, because usually when you see sales drop off like that, that is what you're expecting. Exactly. And so a lot of analysts either weren't paying attention to a lot of the more minute factors as to why this could happen, and were just like, oh, well, competition, I knew it. Or they were like, aha, this is a great way that we can spin, since I'm shorting Tesla millions of dollars, now I can spin the public into thinking that Tesla is going to be bankrupt.
Exactly. Now let's look at Q1 revenue. So Q1 revenue was $4.5 billion, way down from the last two quarters of $6.8 and $7.2 billion. But look at the big picture. Q1 revenue was still above 2018's Q2. In fact, it was the third highest revenue in Tesla history. Year-over-year increase from $3.4 billion back in Q1 of 2018 shows that it's $1.1 billion higher than just 1 year ago. That's a 32% year-over-year growth in revenue.
Right.
That's incredible.
And that's with poor Model S and X sales.
Yep.
And cars being stuck on ships.
Exactly. Now, if we look at gross profit, we had a Q1 gross profit of $566 million. Now, gross profit, remember, is revenue minus the direct cost of producing that good, so labor and materials. If we look at it with the year-over-year perspective, we see that the growth was $109 million, or 23%. Again, numbers you're not hearing from most analysts. So their operating income, they had a loss of $522 million, but a year-over-year improvement of 12%. Now, according to Tesla, there should be another loss in Q2, but then they should be profitable in Q3. My opinion, we wouldn't really be so upset about this if Elon hadn't said about a year ago that they would be profitable going forward.
Right. I mean, he said basically Q3 of last year that, we're profitable now and we're going to remain profitable for the foreseeable future.
Right. That was dumb.
It was a dumb thing to say because obviously you don't know
There's too many
what's
moving
coming
parts.
down the pike.
Exactly.
So just don't say that.
Right.
And then when you have a profit, you won't be like, oh, well, I was wrong. You don't have to say that.
Well, because Wall Street always works off of guidance, right? If you say we're going to do something and you do it, they're like, pat on the back. If you say you're going to do something and you don't do it even by the littlest amount,
they're like, oh no, you messed up. Right.
All right, so Q1's GAAP gross margins. Everyone likes to talk about their gross margins. Now, this is a difficult company to talk about margins with because most auto manufacturers just do what?
Cars. Auto
make cars.
manufacturing. Right. And Tesla
does
cars.
Everything.
They do cars. They do solar. They do battery projects. They're getting into software now. They're going to be doing insurance pretty soon. Obviously not in these quarters that we're talking about now. But still, there's a lot going on.
Right. And they're a very young company, so they're putting a lot of money into research and development. So they had a 12.5% gross margin, and that was the lowest in years and since they've scaled production. Why? Well, basically the lower cost of the Model 3 and the higher cost to deliver it. Also, Tesla Energy had gross margins of only 2% in Q1, which is very low. So that brought down their overall margins.
Right. And again, this is due to poor profits because the car is stuck on ships and the Model S. Like it mostly just comes down to those
2 points, exactly. But let's go to their operating expenses, which I think is actually some good news. So if we look here, operating expenses have leveled off at about $1 billion a quarter. Those are research and development and selling, general, and administrative costs. So the blue line there is the total of both the R&D and the SG&A.
I see. So, and it's nice to see that it's sort of leveled off because as a company, they're still growing.
Yes.
And this is I think, where a lot of the cost cutting and trimming as a company has come into play.
Yes. This is a weird looking chart. This is Q1's revenue year over year versus operating expenses year over year. And what I like to look at charts like this is we see revenue growth in blue, and that's higher than their operating expense growth in red. This is a good trend to see. Basically, what we're seeing here is that the red trend, the operating expenses, is trending down. That's good. The blue trend is hard to see. It's so lumpy. Okay, it's up 1 month, down another month. But in general, it's higher than their operating expenses. So that's a good piece of information.
Interesting.
Now, Q1 cash. They have almost $2.2 billion of cash on hand. That's down from $3.8 billion of cash on hand in the last quarter. But let's keep in mind that's after making a huge $920 million bond payment. So the good news is they're guided for increased cash balance going forward. I think 2.2 on hand is fine because Elon has said he doesn't want to have big amounts of cash. He wants to put that money into doing something
Right,
with
because
it.
I mean, you can sit on cash and that's great. But if you're not innovating, if you're not putting that cash into something that's going to be kind of an investment, let's talk about robo taxis for a minute.
Yeah.
You would be stupid to be sitting on $2.2 billion in cash
Exactly.
if you could be producing robo taxis, which are going to be making you $30,000 a year a piece that only cost you, as a company, less than $30,000 to produce.
Right.
I mean, and could last for 1 million miles, which means that you're going to be making
Money for a long
a
time.
very long time. You could be making millions of dollars on each car, which normally, let's just think about this, when you sell a car for $35,000, you're making $38,000, not $1 million a car.
Right. So Q1 cash flow is down. In the last 2 quarters of 2018, Tesla had fantastic free cash flow. That's operating cash flow minus capex of $881 million and $910 million. But in Q1, that was reversed to a negative $920 million. Now, why was this? Because they built thousands of cars that weren't delivered yet. So that cash will come in this quarter. And this is why Elon has changed the schedule for how they build cars at Fremont. He said that instead of cranking out one region's cars for weeks and weeks and then loading them into the delivery system, which overloads the delivery system, he's now learned that doesn't work, and they're going to smooth out their production.
Right. And I think that going into this, they were thinking, aha, we're going to have to, shut down lines and stuff and switch into, European models of cars, because there's slight differences between, European and North American cars. So they're like, well, if we just limit the amount of switching that we have to do, we'll just run it a whole month of European cars.
More efficient.
And then, of course, less downtime. But then you run into the problem of you put all those cars on ships, they all arrive at the same time, and then suddenly the delivery centers are like, we have to deliver these cars now?
Right.
It's like, yes, they've been on ships the whole quarter.
Yeah.
We need these out now. And they're like, I don't know how to do it.
When I was in Tilburg, Amsterdam, they were delivering cars as fast as 400 per day. That's
insane.
You can't do that correctly at that rate.
And you can't continue and do that fast enough.
No.
And so now they're actually going to switch to, 1 week on North America, 1 week on international, which I think is a lot smarter. And well, I mean, hindsight is 2020. At the beginning, you'd be like, we're going to save a lot of money by doing it this way.
What I liked is that they learned from their mistakes.
And they've changed it.
Yeah. So let's look at Q1 energy storage. So 229 megawatt hours in Q1. Now that's the third highest deployment in the history of Tesla. They are not demand starved. So people want their products. They are battery starved. They are operating their battery division on scraps, according to Elon. So imagine when they aren't battery starved anymore. So look at that quarter right there, Q1 of 2017. That's when the Australian battery was built. And that's the results for that month,
right?
For that quarter.
And
that's when Elon was just like,
right,
put batteries into
and
that.
that's right before the Model 3 came out. So there were no batteries going into Model 3s. So he had all the batteries in the world practically, and he was able to put out that much.
Right.
And now all of the battery production has been going to Model 3s.
Yeah, so Tesla stated in their earnings letter that they expect energy storage revenue to increase significantly in 2019. It's mainly the backlog of Powerwall orders that are in there. Tesla had $1.6 billion in revenue from the energy division in 2018. So from a revenue growth perspective, this is growing quite nicely. All right, so Q1 solar deployed. Let's look at this chart. Pretty depressing, only 47 megawatts. That's the lowest since they bought Solar City. So yes, it's bad. They stopped their loan lease program. They're going for cash sales only. But I think what's going to be exciting is when Solar Roof finally hits. And that's the big question. They're on version 3 of the Solar Roof now. They're iterating to try and find something that'll hold up to the test of time. We don't know when it's going to be ready for prime time, but when it is, hopefully these numbers will start to go back up.
Yep.
So some little tidbits from the earnings letter. There was a one-time charge of $188 million, and we figured out that this was $120 million was from the S and X price adjustments, and $68 million was related to restructuring, so the stores closing and stuff like that, lost leases. They admit to building the Model 3 in batches as opposed to the Model S and X, so that's an important piece that we kind of knew they were doing, but I want you to explain that.
So basically, if you went on Tesla's website today and you ordered a Model S or a Model X, at some point in the future, they would begin building it. So they would, take the batteries, pop them all in there, and then they, bolt on the wheels and put the steering wheel on it and everything like that. If you buy a Model 3, basically what happens is some guy goes into a lot and they're like, so, okay, I need a red Model 3 with 18-inch tires and that one right there. Perfect. And so he goes and grabs that. Basically, they're just building a bunch of Model 3s and then they're saying, all right, who gets this Model 3?
Right.
So it's not built based on demand, which I think allows them to build them faster.
Right. Now, looking at this chart here, the gray line on top is the industry average of how many days a car sits in inventory. The red line at the bottom is how many days a Tesla car sits in inventory. And you can see that basically the industry average is twice what the Tesla average is.
Right. And you might be like, oh, but look, Q1, it took a little jump up. And it's like, they weren't delivered. Sitting on boats.
Right. So another tidbit from the earnings letter, and this is not even small at all. This is the Robo Taxi announcement.
Yep.
A custom-made Robo Taxi capable of running about 1 million miles using a single battery pack with all the sensors and computing power for full autonomy should cost less than $38,000 to produce. We believe low vehicle cost, low maintenance cost, and an expected powertrain efficiency of 4.5 miles per kilowatt hour should make this the lowest cost of ownership and to be the most profitable autonomous taxi on the market.
And let's just...
this is...
Right.
That's a mic drop moment.
Right. I mean, imagine for a moment if there was a company that had just come out of stealth mode. They'd been in stealth mode for 10 years, and they'd been working on this autonomous taxi, this electric autonomous taxi, and it was going to be able to do all these things. And they were like, and our name, we're called Schmoober, and, look at us, we're going to do this thing. Everyone would be like, whoa,
yeah, that would be worth
Schmoober.
That would be like $100 billion company.
Right
out of the gate.
People would just be like pouring money into it. They'd be like, oh my gosh, can't wait. And everyone would be the talk of the town. And everyone would be so hyped about it.
And that's with no proven track record.
Right. Tesla is going to do this and people are like, oh, whatever.
Right.
Their balance sheet.
Next tidbit here was their capacity expansion, and it took me a minute to kind of wrap my head around this. They said, we intend Model 3 to be the first step in a platform which we can cost effectively and quickly replicate across geographies and vehicle types. We have spent years developing this platform, and Gigafactory Shanghai and our planned Model Y production line will be the first to reap the benefits of this investment. Learning from our experience, we can now build a second-generation Model 3 line in China that we expect will be at least 50% cheaper per unit of capacity than our Model 3 related lines in Fremont and at Gigafactory 1. Our Model Y manufacturing capacity will have the same simplicity as the line planned for Gigafactory Shanghai.
Right.
This is huge.
This is such good news because, I mean, if they're able to implement basically what is just a carbon copy of the Model 3 line with all of the improvements that they want to make, but there's probably some improvements that they even can't make, just plop that right into a brand new factory with all the learnings already figured out.
Yep.
Bang. You can do that.
Half the price.
And, they don't have to go through production hell again.
Nope.
Same thing with the Model Y. The Model Y is basically just a Model 3 with a couple different parts.
Yep. It's ready
exactly
to go.
The same thing. It's ready to go. I don't think enough people are thinking about that the model, no one is talking about the Model Y anymore.
No.
Have you noticed that? It's just crickets. Everyone's like,
Yep.
hey, well, the pickup truck's going to be cool. But no one is talking about the Model Y.
Which is going to be huge.
It's going to be huge, and it's going to be built on the Model 3 platform. It's going to drive amazingly, and it's going to be produced amazingly cheaply compared to, having to develop a brand new car like when they brought out the Model 3 and went through production hell.
For guidance outlook, Tesla said, we reaffirm our prior guidance of 360,000 to 400,000 vehicle deliveries in 2019, representing an increase of approximately 45 to 65% compared to 2018. If our Gigafactory Shanghai is able to reach volume production early in Q4 this year, we may be able to produce as many as 500,000 vehicles globally in 2019. Again, where's all the doom and gloom? This company, they're guiding for being able to sell a humongous, like 50% more vehicles than last year.
Right.
Also with Model S and X, with the recently announced product improvements on Model S and Model X, as well as the continued expansion of Model 3 globally, we expect our order rate to continue to increase throughout the year as our production levels increase. We believe we will deliver between 90,000 and 100,000 vehicles in Q2.
And keep in mind the improvements that they made to the Model S and Model X. These were things that people were waiting for, so they weren't buying their cars,
Right.
which means that they were holding off,
Right.
maybe saving up
Yep.
to buy a Model S and a Model X when these changes got made. So I think that there's going to be a lot of people who are excited to buy a 370-mile ranged Model S.
Yeah.
And, I mean, like, that's almost a no-brainer with better performance, better torque,
Better suspension, maybe
suspension.
free ludicrous mode.
Yeah, there's a huge bit of demand that I think has just been pent up.
So for CapEx, which is capital expenditures, they expect to spend $2 billion to $2.5 billion in 2019. That's for the Giga Shanghai, the Model Y, and the Semi, along with the supercharger network, service centers, and the mobile service fleet. Operating cash flow less CapEx, so that means minus capital expenditures, should be positive in every quarter, including Q2. As the impact of higher deliveries and cost reduction take full effect, we expect to return to profitability in Q3 and significantly reduce our loss in Q2. So then we get to Elon's remarks. To me, this is always the most fun part of the show, listening to his question and answers and his remarks. He reiterated what he said on Autonomy Day, that all Teslas built today have full self-driving hardware in them. I think a lot of people miss that point. It's a big point. It means that Tesla will be the only company in the world to make their own Robo Taxis. In-house batteries, in-house powertrain, in-house full self-driving computers. These cars will make between $10,000 to $30,000 per year, and they will have 1 million of them on the road by 2020. Tesla will have the most profitable autonomous robo-taxi network on the market. At 18 cents per mile, it is half to a third of the cost of Uber and Lyft.
Right. And let's just, for a second, when people are like, well, how are they possibly going to make 1 million robo-taxis? They haven't even made 1 million cars yet. It's because basically all the cars that are on the road that have Autopilot 2 hardware, again, are going to be able to be taxis. Now, the chip is not in-house. It's made by Samsung. The
fabrication of the chip.
Yes, but the design of the chip was Tesla.
Okay, but the
Right.
fabrication of the chip, that you just send that out to a chip fab.
It's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not the issue.
Right.
I mean, so what can Bears dispute there? I mean, he has the chip, he has the data, he has the fleet. He'll be the first to get to full self-driving. And even if his timeline is off, he's still the first to get there. So this, to me, seems like game, set, match. There's not been one mention of one competitor who could possibly get to market before him at any scale.
Right. And if they were, like, let's say,
let's say
cruise automation or Waymo, they do have autonomous taxis in particular mapped locations. None of the locations, all the locations are in places where it never rains, never snows.
Exactly.
I think that that's not a mistake.
Exactly.
I think that they're going to have trouble with New York. I think that they're going to have trouble with all big cities.
Exactly, because they're using LiDAR, which we're going to get into. So Elon also said Model 3 is the best-selling premium car in the U.S. They beat the next car in that segment by 60%, and nobody on Earth predicted this.
Well,
did you?
I think we did.
Did we?
Didn't we?
I don't think we predicted that they'd be.
Someone should go back and just look through. We didn't say 60%, but we said it's going to be huge.
Sure, we did.
Come on, give ourselves some credit here.
All right. He talked about the fact that the S and X new powertrain improvements are now in production. He pointed out that they can charge at 220 kilowatts on version 3 supercharging with the new car. So again, that's a huge improved S and X. And he talked about the ludicrous upgrade for free, the fact that Motor Trend drove the Model S from San Francisco to LA, which is 370 miles at highway speeds, nonstop. And he said they still had plenty of range left. Zachary Kirkhorn, who is the new CFO, talked about that this was the most complicated quarters the last few in Tesla's history. They had deliveries to Europe and China. They had to come up with the standard range lineup for the Model 3. They had the S and X upgrades. He said, we do not expect to have the delivery difficulties repeat in Q2. He also pointed out that April was the largest number of deliveries in a month in the history of the company. So I think we should look at that as a positive.
Right.
They actually learned how to do something new that they'd never really done before at that scale. They talked about how the Model 3 margin has declined to 20%. And they said that basically this was due to the February 28th pricing adjustments, the standard range lineup, which are cheaper. But they did say that there's cost reductions in labor content, warehousing, and scrap, which are double-digit improvements, and this helped offset this impact. And they said that Tesla will be increasing the cash balance going forward.
Right. And I think that a lot of people might be like, oh, sure, they're making cost reduction improvements. If they hadn't continually been making these cost reduction improvements, we wouldn't have been seeing the standard range Model 3.
No.
It just would not have been able to happen.
Right.
And so for people who are like, oh, are they really making these cost reductions? Are these really going to happen? Or is this just a load of crap? They've been making these consistently, and they would not have been able to make the standard range if they hadn't been making these cost reductions, because you can't go from a long range all-wheel drive Model 3 price and then sell a standard range Model 3, which is the standard range plus software limited, and still make a 20% profit if you were making a 25% profit before. That's just not how math works. Right. So they've actually had to make, and they did make, cost reductions. And if they continue to make the cost reductions, the margins will go back up.
And so Zachary said that personally, he has never felt more excited about the future of the company. So will Tesla be able to complete the Maxwell acquisition? Now, this is a question from say.com, and say.com did ranked questions from investors. So you get to go in there and vote up or vote down your questions.
If you're an investor.
If you're an investor.
Tesla.
So if you're an investor, go to say.com, register yourself, because you could get your question answered. And a whole bunch of these first questions were the ones that went to Elon first, and they were the best questions of the day.
Right. They weren't some stuffy analysts. These were people who, do their homework, who, might have Tesla as a big chunk of their portfolio. So they care a lot, and they know all of the deep questions, and they get voted on. So you get the best ones rising to the top. It's not just some analyst who's like, oh, I have to go to this Tesla thing today. What am I going to write? I'll ask him about his Q1 results.
So great question, which is, will Tesla be able to complete the Maxwell acquisition? And a great answer. The lawyer, one of the lawyers for Tesla, answered this and said they've gotten the SEC approvals, they're on schedule, and they're going to plan to close in mid-May.
That's super exciting.
Question came in about a Tesla insurance program, and Elon said, yes, we are creating a Tesla insurance product to be launched in about a month, more compelling than anything out there. What?
Yeah. That's
great question. Great answer.
Exciting. Yeah.
Question, will the energy division really take off? And so Elon talked about the fact that they have a battery cell scarcity. Later this year, they will finally start giving 5 to 10% of their cell output to battery storage. That's huge, because there are far less cells in a Powerwall than there are in a car. So by giving 5 to 10%, you might say, well, that's not a lot, but it's a lot to Powerwalls. So there is a backlog of people wanting Powerwalls. And so, in fact, he predicted there'll be a 300% growth in Powerwall sales this quarter. So,
and what does that mean? It means money.
He also talked about the version 3 on the solar roof tile. They have to be confident that it can last for 20 to 25 years, but they are scaling up Buffalo to get ready for that. Question about where and when the Semi will go into production. Jerome Guillen, the COO, I like to call him, he basically said that the prototypes of the Semi are working really well. They've been driving them all over the place, and they're learning so much from it, and they will start production next year. So we had heard before that 2019 that we would be getting the production. That has been pushed to next year. We do know that the batteries and the motors will be made at Gigafactory 1. Now, were you surprised by that?
Yes, because throughout this entire earnings call, there was absolutely no mention of Lathrop whatsoever. Not a single solitary question.
Yeah, so Lathrop,
answer.
California being the site of a brand new big, what is it, distribution center, factory? We don't know.
Right.
And we've been conjecturing that it'll be a factory. Is it to make the semi-truck?
Is it to make more Model 3s? Is it to make the Model Ys? To make the Roadster? We don't know.
No one asked the question, and no one answered the question.
So that's a question that I still have, maybe for the earnings 2 call. Maybe if some of you investors want to put that on Say.
All right, so a question came in from say.com. How soon for the full self-driving computer? And Elon said, well, you're not going to even get the features released yet that'll use that chip for the next 2 to 3 months, so don't rush to worry about it.
Which reveals...
He gave a real veal there.
That
exactly.
In 2 to 3 months, there's going to be...
something cool.
Something that relies on the chip, that needs the chip, which means that I want to get my damn computer put in my car.
So his answer kind of failed. He made you want to get the chip faster. Yeah.
It would be, it could have been worse. He could have been like, oh yeah, everyone with the chip is driving around. I'm driving around right now. Like, I mean, yeah, he could have said that, but I mean, obviously this is 2 to 3 months is, I guess it's like a long ways away in Elon terms, but for the rest of us, I mean, that's
right around the corner.
2 to 3 months. I mean, we've been waiting thousands of years for this kind of technology.
Then Elon answered this question about Model Y production. He said the Model Y will either be produced in California or Nevada. Now, when I heard California, I thought maybe Lathrop. But then he later in the answer said it's a close call between Giga and Fremont. So he did not say Lathrop. So that kind of...
What's going on in Lathrop? They're going to make a model... Maybe it's a pickup truck.
Maybe. He said the decision for the Model Y will take place in the next few weeks.
I mean, what could it be?
I think it's...
the Giga factory in China isn't even like built yet, and they're like, oh, we're going to start production later this year. Lathrop is practically already built.
I know.
What are you doing in there?
I know. It can't just be a distribution center. I think it's a factory.
I'm so excited.
JP Morgan had the question, what is giving confidence to project a 50% growth? And Elon said, we see strong demand for the vehicles. We have this sweet spot, this $39,000 Model 3 Standard Range Plus with autopilot. He said it's super compelling because it has basically everything you wanted with even a few extra things thrown in there. So he's like, a lot of people are actually going for that car. And that's why they took the $35,000 car off the menu, unless you call them, because he said so many people just have been choosing this instead.
Right. And I think that that's really smart. I mean, sell a car that you're going to make a decent margin on and have the $35,000 Model 3 available just in case. And you don't have to change any, mess around with any of your production lines. And you get to have the people who buy the base Model 3 then upgrade later on in their Model 3 experience when they actually have the funds to pay for it.
Right.
I think it's brilliant.
Question from New Street Research, will the demand on S and X come back to 25,000? And again, you're seeing that these analysts keep asking just stupid quarter questions.
Right.
And so Elon's like, yes, they'll return to 100,000 a year. It's his best guess. And he thinks that actually demand will return to normal in Q2. Why? Because they've put so many improvements in the S and X.
Bingo. Yeah.
Adam Jonas from Morgan Stanley asked this question. I think this is interesting because Morgan Stanley, after the call, put a price reduction on the stock down to 240, which is what it was headed down to. And so is it because of Adam Jonas? I don't know. Adam asked, when could Tesla report accident data, like actual granular data? Because he said, your cars are 2 times safer now. Why don't you want to share the data? And Elon said, we do share some of the data with insurance companies, but we have non-disclosure agreements with them, so we can't just give it to everyone. And he said, plus, if we were to tell you about all the data as it came out, then as soon as there was some bad data, it would get blown up in the media. So he said, we're going to keep it high level. Adam also asked about the drama around the share price. He said, is that a distraction? How important is it for Tesla to be a publicly traded company? Would you prefer to be private? Elon said, unfortunately, yes, I would have liked to have been private, but that ship has sailed. He said, being public is a pain because the market is manic depressive. He said, he quoted Warren Buffett here, and he said, it's like having someone stand at the edge of your house shouting out prices for your house, even though your house doesn't change every day. Macquarie asked whether there are supplier limitations impacting production, because as you remember in Q1, there were some supplier problems. For instance, some cars were shipped to Europe with American headlights, even though they need the European headlights. Elon said there are no supplier problems in Q2 that he knows of. Another question from Macquarie asked if Model S and X is cannibalizing Model 3 sales. And Elon talked about the fact that only 3% of the trade-ins come from Model S. Why is that important?
I think it shows that there's a pretty distinct line in consumers of people who will buy a Model S or Model X, much more expensive car, and people who will go for the Model 3. So, I mean, I think that people who've been buying the Model S's and X's so far either love their cars so much that they don't want to trade it in for Model 3, which is possible, or they're just the type of people who are just going to be Model S and X people, and they won't need a Model 3.
Wolf Research, a lot of these analysts like to tell Elon stuff like he doesn't know it. And they're like, well, so your average sale price is just under $50,000 for the Model 3 since the price adjustments. I guess the implied question was like, that's a low figure. But what Elon is pointing out is that the average sale price for the Standard Range and the Standard Range Plus has been increasing every week since then because 50% of the people are buying the long range variants. So a lot of people still like to have the long range battery. Tony Sacconaggi from Bernstein asked, why not raise capital? Elon basically said that raising capital shouldn't be a substitute for making the company run frugally. He basically likes to have a Spartan diet. He thinks when there's a merit to raising capital, he'll do it. But in the meantime, he thinks there's actually been a lot gained by running the company really efficiently, because he believes that if as they mature, they can't just keep going to the market to ask for money when there's a bad quarter. They have to learn to spend their money efficiently and wisely.
I think this is a really smart tactic that he's taking because whether the public suddenly is like, oh my gosh, we would never raise capital for Tesla. It's good to not get in a situation where your company is reliant on it,
right.
And it means that he's basically just efficient, trimmed all the fat off of his company and keep it nice and lean. Mm-hmm. Whereas normally, I think if you're growing a company like this, there's tendency to overspend and just to be a fat, kind of lazy company.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at their $920 million bond offering, it was snatched up by the market at really good rates. And that was back when there was this fear of Tesla going bankrupt.
Right.
So I think as time goes on, the markets are ready to give Tesla money if he needs it. Alex Potter from Piper Jaffray asked, is there an update on the store closings? And Elon said here, I didn't handle messaging on that well. He admitted that he didn't really get that message out.
Which he didn't do a good job with.
Right. He said, we'll continue to have stores, though, and we'll add stores at high traffic areas in our target market. We will close stores in locations with poor foot traffic. It's just common sense. He said stores are info centers, test drive places, and places to sell merchandise, but ultimately you buy online. Now, question about the merchandise. Most Tesla stores don't sell much merchandise anymore. I wish they did. I really think you could sell a lot more t-shirts and mugs and hats and jackets if you did it in your stores.
And flamethrowers.
They should sell them there.
Or have a little flamethrower range.
Yeah. So Oppenheimer asked, are you battery constrained at 100,000? Elon said, no. Dumb questions. Why would Elon say they're going to make 100,000 cars if they're battery constrained?
Right.
And then he asked the question about Maxwell Tech, how fast are you going to integrate, which I thought was interesting here is Elon said, that's a secret sauce question. And he said that we're going to have an investor day later this year or early next year, a whole day to talk about battery cell technology. How exciting is that going to be?
I am so looking forward to these investor days.
Yeah.
I mean, because the last one was a freaking mic drop.
I
can't wait to see what this new Maxwell technology, super capacitor or maybe some kind of magic battery cell. I mean, could be a solid state cell. It could be the thing that we've been waiting.
I don't think it will, but I think it's still going to be exciting because dry technology plus ultra capacitors is very cool stuff.
Yeah.
RBC Capital had a question which led to a really cool point. They asked about if there's an increased take rate on FSD. Now, what does that mean?
Take rate is kind of a dumb way of saying, like, of the people who buy your cars, how many buy full self-driving package?
Right. So historically, very few people have chosen full self-driving because it's not a thing, right? Why would you pay for something that doesn't really exist yet?
It might happen in a couple years.
Right.
I mean, when you were ordering a Model 3, that was basically it. There was no and you'll get this. It's not it wasn't even like you'll get a free hat. There was nothing.
Nothing. Here's the cool part. As full self-driving features start to roll out and people begin to believe that it's happening, that rate is going to go up. And what that means is that they get to sell software that they've already developed and that's already there in the cars. There's no cost for them.
Right.
So when you flick that switch and you say, yeah, I want full self-driving, Tesla gets an extra few $1,000s.
And I think there was also another smart thing that they did, which they did a little while ago, which is where they split up enhanced autopilot and full self-driving package. So they moved a couple of the things that were in enhanced driving. They made autopilot cheaper, just autopilot on its own. Bumped other things up to full self-driving, whereas usually there was nothing, you would get nothing with full self-driving. Now suddenly you would get auto park and summon, and now enhanced summon.
Exactly.
So those were features that now you can actually have today and use. So of course you're going to get it because now you're like, oh, and I'm also super looking forward to full self-driving instead of being like, yeah, I hope someday we'll have full self-driving, maybe. Now you're like, yeah, this is actually full self, it's full self-driving me into the parking space.
And Zachary Kirkhorn said that the upgraded powertrain for the S and X actually cost them less. They're using the rear drive unit from the Model 3 as the front drive unit for the S and the X. So they gave more and it cost them less. How awesome is that?
That's efficiency.
Question from UBS led to the fact that Elon said Giga 3 is going incredibly well. They expect 1,000 to 2,000 cars being built there per week by the end of this year, and that they're using multiple cell suppliers for Giga 3. Again, fantastic news. Like, once you dive into this earnings call, there's very little bad news other than the fact that they screwed up on the deliveries a little bit by trying to like force them all in one quarter.
Right.
But other than that, it's been fantastic.
Yeah.
We're seeing the fact that there's demand for the car. That again is where all these other analysts are looking at Tesla like they're a typical car dealer, and they're like, well, demand is down throughout the world for cars, so you must be feeling it too. And it's like, you know what? No, they don't sell the same car.
It's a completely different thing. It's like,
Right.
oh, well, it looks like MP3 players are down. So clearly the iPod isn't going to be doing so well. It's like,
Yeah.
no.
Basically, what we heard about in this 1 week of craziness is a Model S and X refresh. The demand for Model 3 is high. Maxwell technology is going as planned. There's a Robo Taxi network that's going to be coming out next year. Full self-driving margins are getting better. $2.2 billion of cash on hand, with cash growing each quarter. The Model Y and the Model 3 to be built at half the capex. New full self-driving chip has been made and is working, years ahead of the competition on that. Analysts don't understand the company at all. So just wait till they flick on the Robo Taxi network. That, to me, is going to be game changer day.
Right. Everyone's going to be like, so it's a car company? It's like, no, it's like if Uber owned all the cars and the cars drove themselves and they didn't have to pay anybody and the cars lasted for 1 million miles.
Because let's look at the markets, right? Lyft is IPOing, Uber's IPOing. Those two companies combined are going to be worth probably around $150 billion. Tesla's not worth $150 billion in the market's eyes. So you got Tesla's stock price that's just been dropping to crazy low levels.
I know.
I'm just saying, this is just, don't pay attention to my stock advice at all, okay? Because I'm long on Tesla and I'm a Tesla fanboy. But this is a huge opportunity to buy Tesla stock.
Yeah.
Because the market's just doing what they typically do, which is to look at stupid quarter analyst FUD,
Right.
and they're not looking at the big picture because they don't understand it. As we reported yesterday in our bonus stories, Jim Cramer, he's one of the biggest critics to Tesla, and he pretty much admitted that he doesn't understand the Robo Taxi network. He basically is like, Elon's this big think guy, and we're all like Lilliputians, and it's like, yeah, you don't get him.
Right.
Why don't you get it? They all talk about it as if it's not going to happen. Elon admitted he's not always right about when it's going to happen, but he's always right that it will happen.
Right. And he has a track record to prove it. I mean, yes, it took him a little bit longer to launch reusable landable rockets. It took a little bit longer to get the Model S out. Took a little bit longer to get the Model X out. Took a little bit longer to get the Model 3 out. But they're all out. They're all amazing things. All of those things are unbelievably amazing, and we've had autopilot for years
and
now.
It works.
Yeah, we've been driving around on autopilot since 2016. We drove across the country in 2016 using 99% autopilot.
Right.
So this technology has been, in development at the company for a very long time, and it's only been improving. Now it can actually take off ramps and on ramps. It's so exciting to think in 1 year they're going to have it feature complete, and in maybe 2 years that the regulators could be, saying, okay, turn it on for everybody, and that you could fall asleep and wake up at grandma's house.
It's lack of imagination. These analysts are so used to just looking at numbers all day long, I guess, in columns and charts and graphs, that they don't understand that this is just taking a chart and then putting something way over here.
Right.
It's like, it's off the charts.
Right. And it's a disruption, and people don't get disruptions. That's why it's called a disruption.
Yep.
Nobody thought that Amazon, when they were selling books, did anyone think like, oh yeah, Amazon's going to just be doing all sorts of stuff. They're going to have AW, they're going to have servers all over the place, and they're going to
have a Amazon Prime network.
Right. It's like, no, they're bookstore, right? Oh,
Wait.
Tesla's just a car company.
They're going to have TV shows?
Right, and no one thought that Uber was going to happen. As soon as it came out, people were like, oh, why not just take a taxi cab?
Right.
Do you take a taxi cab now?
Right.
No. And are you going to take an Uber in the future?
Nope.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for watching this in depth. We like to try and get to the the nitty gritty and the stuff that wasn't talked about in other places. I do want to give a huge shout out to Gally over at Hyperchange, because he's always right on with this coverage, and I really enjoyed his take on what's going on with Tesla. So thank you so much for watching, everybody.
Now you know.